Never know these things. No, it's right.
Perfect. Okay, Boker Tov. Boker Tov, everybody. I hope everybody is well. It's a Chanukah Sameach. We spent a little bit of time last week on Chanukah, so this week we're going to spend a little bit of time on the next stage, which is where we're learning a little bit about the why of Judaism as it relates to Kriyas HaTorah, reading the Torah. It happens in so many spaces in our lives, but we don't think about it necessarily so often as to some of the details. So let's start at the very beginning. Very basics. Why do we read the Torah publicly? Like, when did this come from? What's the deal with reading the Torah publicly?
Nice too.
So the truth is that this actually is a very, very, very ancient minhag. In fact, so ancient, the Gemara tells us that it goes back to the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah, they decided, the prophets at that time decided to enact a reading on Shabbos and on Monday and Thursday. Why on those days was the Torah to be read? And the reason is because they realized they had an experience which taught them a very important lesson in life, and that was when the nation of Israel left the Red Sea. It says that they went for 3 days and they couldn't find water, at which point in time they capitulated, they called out to Moshe Rabbeinu, they complained, they couldn't do it. We know that a person cannot survive without water for 3 days. And therefore they said, if that's true of water, then surely that should be true of our spiritual water. I'm sure we've all had experiences in life where you have a experience and you're just at the right moment in life, you reflect on that moment and you say, oh, there's a lesson for me to learn in life, right? And it may not have to do specifically with that, but it is a metaphor for the things that we need to be learning. And that's what happened to them. They said, you know what? If we can't survive without water for 3 days, then it must be that we can't survive without Torah for 3 days. We just received the Torah. Let's ensure that we're going to make sure that there's never a time where a Jew will ever be without Torah for 3 days. And therefore they made it, if you look at the 7-day week, so if you have leaning on the reading of the Torah on day 2, day 5, and day 7, there's never a gap of more than 3 days. And this cycle continues. Therefore, we have it as such. Therefore, it's worthwhile understanding that the reading of the Torah is meant to be a learning of the Torah. Right? Today we have so many learning resources and so many excellent teachers available at our fingertips that we forget that the ancient learning of Torah was done through the public reading of the Torah itself. However, it's worthwhile noting that 2,500 years ago, it was given a little more legitimacy and form by Ezra HaSofer. We know that the Gemara teaches that one of the takonos he made, one of the enactments, he made many enactments to frame Jewish ritual. One of them was that he created the framework that he made sure that there was going to be at least 3 psukim for every aliyah. And he was going to make sure there was at least 10 psukim in every small kriya. And so he formulated the structure as we have it today. Much like at the time of Ezra, they were formulating the Siddur, taking the general organic ideas that they had beforehand and formulating it into specifics. That formulation came at the time of Ezra. That's 2,500 years ago. So just the original idea goes back all the way to the giving of the Torah. The actual formulation as we have it today goes back 2,500 years ago. Now, if you're thinking about a 7-day circuit and you want to make sure that there's no gaps of 3 days in that 7-day circuit, there are other permutations, in case you were wondering, right? So you could technically go day 3, 5, and 7, and you're still good, right? So you could do Tuesday, right? So from Shabbos to Tuesday is not a 3-day gap; it's a 2-day gap. You're fine that way as well, right? So rather than making the 2-day gap as a Tuesday, Wednesday, make it a Sunday, Monday, right? Why does it have to be that way? And so the Rashba, in his commentaries on the Gemara there, in Baba Kama, this Gemara appears in Baba Kama Daf Pei Beis Amud Aleph, the Rashba says, is because we know the tradition tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu went up Har Sinai, it was on a Thursday, and when he came down, it was on a Monday. And therefore we have a tradition that, first of all, if we're going to enact Torah reading, we're going to do it on those 2 days. And it's also seen as those 2 days have a greater aura of mercy, which is why we read the Torah on those days specifically. So it's not just we're getting 3 days, it's also those specific days. Yes?
Yeah, but then also, that's when Jews went to the markets.
Yes, so later on it does seem to be that there was more of a market day, so all the farmers would come in and this would be the time everybody goes in. And it's a gathering day, no question. But it seems to be that, according to the Rashba, it's predating that practice. That's what's fascinating as well. It seems to align with that practice, but it does seem to be as such. Now, that doesn't explain the reading we do on a Shabbos Mincha, right? Meaning the Shabbos Mincha is not part of this framework. And this goes back to, it's only 2,500 years ago when Ezra enacted it. He added the Shabbos Mincha Leining, which goes towards the next week. So it's already in the next week's parasha. And the reason he added it, interestingly enough, was because it says that people should not spend their Shabbos afternoons on as Yoshvei Koronos, right? Which means hanging out in the bars, right? This is worthwhile thinking about. For religion to succeed, you need to have a matzav. You need to have a situation. You need to have an environment, right? Just recently, I went to the Ohel, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Ohel, just to daven, and I mean, like, oh my goodness, that's the busiest cemetery I've ever seen. It's amazing, and like, just imagine that that all followers of all great people made, a matzav around their kever. It's a pretty amazing thing. Like, you need to have, for something to be remembered, for idea to be grounded, you need to have a situation, you need to have a place to be, and that's what it is. Meaning, Shabbos afternoon is framed, especially in the winter. Right? You come home, you eat lunch, you barely catch a wink, and you're out again for the men. They're out going again to Mincha. It frames the end of Shabbos. So not just going to go for an extended walk with the dog. This Shabbos is different, right? So it frames it, and the Kriyas Torah is part of that. Fascinatingly enough. Now you'll notice that sometimes we take out one Torah, a lot of times. Then sometimes we'll take out two Torahs, and sometimes we'll even take out three Torahs. Why is that? And so the truth is that on special days, we do a special laning, right? So as an example, if it's Rosh Chodesh, we read in the section in the Torah that talks about the Karban of Rosh Chodesh. So we take out a second Torah for that. Why don't you just roll the first one? So the reason is because the Tirchot Tzibur is that it's inconvenient, for those who are there to be rolling the Torah. As an example, yesterday from Parashas Miketz all the way to Rosh Chodesh, which is in Parashas Pinchas. That's a long time. So that's not the appropriate thing to do. It needs to be that there's coordination done, that it's done in such a place. So it is less of a tircha, technically speaking, but even so, we still have our own division. Even that's considered taking up time. But then the question becomes: so why don't you just bring out the Torah at the time you need it? Meaning, you should go like this: Vayibin Saharon, bring out Miketz. Then later on, when it comes time for the seventh Aliyah, which is going to be Rosh Chodesh, bring out the second Atar. So that's seen as being a mafsek. That's creating a break. So we do is bring out all three Torahs that are meant to be learned, all two Torahs that are meant to be learned from at the very beginning. This is the Pri Megadim says in the Eshel Avram. And we bring them all out at the beginning, and then we line them up in 1, 2, 3. That would be what's appropriate. Now, and sometimes in communities you only have one Torah, so you do roll. But this would be the ideal as well. This is a question which most people are aware of, but perhaps not the reasons. And that is that I've seen different kinds of Torahs, right? I've seen a Torah which is, on two rollers and you put it on the table. But I've seen that funny box-looking Torah, right? Right, and it stands up and you roll it on the top, right? So we're like, what's the deal with the different types of Torahs? So let's just clarify something for a moment. If you have something called a Megillah is a short parchment and it goes on one roller, right? So for instance, Megillas Esther, Megillas Rus, are all short rollers, right? Short. They're called a Megillah. They only have one roll, right? If they even have one, right? When it comes to a sefer, although we think of a sefer as a book, right? Because post-print student press in the last 500 years, sefer, technically speaking, is a long document or parchment that has two rollers, right? That's what a Torah is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a long parchment on two rollers, but how those rollers sit or where they're situated is not really a discussion in the earlier tradition. We don't have that description in the Gemara, certainly. We don't have that description in the Mishnah. It doesn't appear in Shulchan Aruch as to what the Torah should look like. But we do know there are different traditions. So in Ashkenazic practice, then those two rollers are wrapped together. There's a gartel, a belt put around them, and then there's a mantle put on the top of them, a beautiful cloth that's put on top of them, and it's stored as such. And it's laid down to lane, and it's leaned in when it goes back in the Aron. In the Sephardic tradition, they have it that those two rollers are standing upright in a box. And then you roll the rollers inside the box, and you read it upright, and you store it upright as well. They also do have a cloth in the front to cover it for the blessings. But other than that, it seems there's a different tradition. Both are valid traditions. Both of these are valid traditions. The question is, where did they come from? It comes back to a very interesting thing which most people are not aware of. and that is it comes back to the halachas of mezuzah. The Gemara describes in Menachos on Lamed Gimel Aleph how mezuzahs are supposed to sit on your lintel of the door. So Rashi, interestingly enough, makes the observation that the mezuzah should go on the door. It's a whole discussion as to how to interpret a particular word in the Gemara, but Rashi understands and he draws a picture. Actually, if you ever take a look at this, the Rashi in Menachos, I'll show you. It's interesting, an interesting picture. He talks here we are. Yeah, the Rashis actually have a little diagram where he talks about different orientations of the mezuzah, and so this is the Rashi in Menachos, and he says that it needs to be upright, like a hinge. That's the way Rashi understands it, which means that the way that the mezuzah should be standing is completely upright. Rabbi Ya'akov disagrees completely, and he said from a number of examples. One of the examples he gives is the Aron in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara Baba Basra describes that the Torah was laid down inside the ark. Right? There was the luchos and there was the scroll of the Torah. It was laid down. Rabbi Ya'akov says the appropriate way to lay down a work of Kodesh is to have it horizontal. So that is a dispute between Rashi and his grandson as to how to store a mezuzah or Sifrei Kodesh in general, because Rabbi Ya'akov is clearly going across the board. In Halacha, the Shulchan Aruch paskins very clearly like Rashi, which is why if you go into a Sephardic house, all the mezuzahs are 90 degrees. They're perpendicular to the floor. They're all directly straight. You notice that any Sephardic house, all mezuzahs are directly straight. In the Ashkenazic tradition, we do a compromise, which is between Rashi and Rabbi Ya'akov, which is at an angle. And that's because it's not horizontal and it's not vertical. That's how we do it, which is an interesting question in general. You could say, sometimes is the compromise either, right? Is 45 degrees 0 or 90? Or have you achieved both? But apparently in this case, we have achieved both. And it's always seen as a very beautiful message in the Ashkenazic home. You say, that's how life is going to be, is you're going to compromise, right? It's going to be, it's not this way, it's not that way, it's going to be a compromise. I remember actually, Mitch Leifer, I was just speaking to Mitch Leifer last week. He just lost his wife, and so he always used to joke to me. He would come over and he said, Linda and I had a disagreement about if we should have. She wanted chicken for supper, and I wanted pizza for supper. So we compromised and we had chicken. That's what he used to always describe that. But nonetheless, it's supposed to be at an angle, right? So in the Ashkenazic tradition, as such, and that's seen as a way to store it. What most people don't realize is that is also transmitted into the way we do our Torahs too, as well. So, for instance, the Radvaz, Rav David ben Zimra, has a responsa where he describes a comment he has from Rabbeinu Tam, who said that it would be most appropriate to build our Aronim, our arks, further backwards to lie the Torahs all straight down. Rabbeinu Tam actually said that that's the way he enacted it in his community in northern France, is that he had his Aron was as such, where it was deeper, and they laid the Torahs down because that's the way he believed it was appropriate to store the Torah, like the Torahs in the Ark, which is what he says in Menachos, right? Whereas, so meaning he is clearly viewing this not as a mezuzah-centric question, but how you store Sifrei Kodesh. That being the case, it makes a whole lot of sense. All Sephardic Torahs are like their mezuzahs, which are always upright. Whether they're stored or read, they're always upright, which is why their bima is flat, right? A Sephardic bima is always directly flat. Whereas in Ashkenazic tradition, the bima is always at an angle, and that's not just to make it ease of access of eyes, that's because it's the mezuzah position, which is between Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, which is also why in the Aron, it is that the Torahs are always leaned. That's not a matter of convenience. That's also because it's like the orientation of the mezuzah, which is between Rashi's opinion and Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, which is the 90 and 0 degree. Most people don't know this because this halach is only paskind in mezuzah. This is where you find the halachas of this, but it happens to be that's where they discuss it, but it applies equally to our Torah as well. Fascinating, right? One interesting exception to this is just so you should be aware is Moroccan Torahs. Moroccans Torahs actually follow Ashkenazic tradition in terms of the way they are held. But just a lot of interesting historical background to this. Why is the bima elevated? Now, in Bati Medrash like this, it isn't. But in most shuls, the bima is elevated and is meant to be. Makes it more complicated when it comes to ease of access and people who perhaps have wheelchairs. Not so simple. But if you look in all old shuls and in most large shuls that are set up correctly, the bima is elevated. Why is that? So it actually comes back to a description we hear 2,500 years ago Ezra and Nehemiah, when they rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, they call everybody to the Shara Maim, to the water gate by the Beis Hamikdash, and they make a large gathering for the Torah, and it describes they make a Migdal Eitz. They make this large platform, and they read it from that platform. That's the way that we read our Torah, is with a large wooden platform. Interestingly enough, obviously it has a practical ramification, and that is it's easier to hear. If you want to get people to hear, you need to be elevated. Sound carries better that way as well, that as it happens to be. And interestingly enough, there is another symbolic reason that's described based on, there's a Tanchuma describes this, and Kabbalistic still understood that the reading of the Torah is seen as a retransmission or reenactment of Sinai. That being the case, then even the orientation of the Torah is elevated above the heads of people, so it's going down, which is the way that Sinai happened as well.
That's why sometimes some of the beamers in Europe are closer to the Aron.
Interesting. Yeah, could be. I actually don't know that. Because the questions usually said the bima is supposed to be emtza hakal. That's what it's supposed to be. I'm not sure how emtza that is. Yeah.
Right. So, but we grew up. Bima the emtza was one type of shul.
Yeah.
And then in the front was another. Like, where is that controversy?
I don't actually know. I really don't know. I do know as follows. If you look at the halachic literature, it talks about the emtza, right? So it says in the middle. It happens to be there's a discussion as to where the chazan should go. That was one of the first disputes of Reform Jewry, was where the Baal Tefillah goes. Interesting enough, is that generally speaking, the Baal Tefillah was always in the front, and then there was a discussion because some of the changes that they wanted to make was to daven in German, and then also to put the Baal Tefillah in the middle, because this way more people could hear. Those are both very altruistic sounding changes. The Chassan Sofer was vociferously against these things. He understood that this was the beginning. It wasn't the end of the questions that were going to be asked, and he refused. But that's the one thing I know about it. Where the actual payment goes, I don't know for sure. That's a really good question.
I
Doctor.
was in Venice once many years ago, and in front of the regular oven, there was a small bench, and there was a painting next door. The rabbi would speak and give the Torah to the women. So he would stand in the little beamer before the big beamer as his platform.
Fascinating. It's a really good call, because it's not many of the times women can't hear from where they are and can't see.
It's repeat the parsha for them. Some kind of
fascinating.
The painting was there.
Fascinating.
Years ago, I had been in a class with one of the YU museum coordinators, and she talked about shul sign for his bima. Sfardim always have it towards the back.
Interesting.
Ashkenazim have it towards the middle. And there's a fascinating shul in Givat HaMivtar in Yerushalayim, which is half Ashkenazi, half Sephardi, and the bima is exactly positioned in the midpoint, where, because the Sephardim have the benches going this way, Ashkenazi going this way, and they have positioned exactly at that midpoint, where it's you have benches this way, then they have the bima, then the benches that are this way. So it has to with different Ashkenazi and Sephardi.
Shalom al Yisrael.
Different Ashkenazi and Sephardi traditions.
There we go. Beautiful. So I don't know the full background to that, but it's fascinating. Shvaskanaz. Okay. Now you'll notice that when the Torah is brought up, you'll notice that you'll have a number of people around the bima. There's supposed to be a Gabbai Rishon, then there's a Gabbai Sheni, and there's a Baal Koreh, right? And then the Oiler. Why is it set up as such? Why do you? Sometimes you'll see that the Torah will go up there, and they'll say, "Come stand here," right? Why is that? So there's a few reasons. One reason is that we know that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to the nation of Israel, He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings the heavens and the earth as witnesses to this tradition, and the reason for that is that because we're going to be held accountable to those witnesses, right? So in general, whenever you want to give over a warning or why you want to give a citation, you do it in the presence of witnesses so that nobody can deny this ever happened, right? The Torah reading on a weekly basis is meant to be that reminder of our responsibilities, right? So it's done with two witnesses, right? So it's done in such a way that you have a man on each side, because that is presented as witnesses that this was given. Meaning, the next week when you said, I didn't really know about the bribe thing, they're like, well, actually, we have two witnesses that you do know about that because we talked about it last week. That's one reason. Another reason which is discussed, that is in the Magen Avraham, and the Levush says a little bit of a different reason. He says that it coming back to the reenactment of Sinai, right? So then it says each of the people play a different role. So you have the Gabbai is the facilitator. The facilitator is seen like Hashem, the facilitator at Sinai, the one who orchestrated the whole thing. Then he has Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe is the one who's actually saying it out to the people. That's the Baal Koreh. The receiver is the Oleh, the person who receives the Aliyah as representative of the people. So you need to have at least 3 people up there. You need to have at least Gabai, Baal Koreh, Oleh as your constellation, as a reenactment of the Sinai experience. Fascinating description as well. Which is an interesting question. Is so why is it that we have a Baal Koreh? Why can't it be that each person lanes their Aliyah? Sometimes you'll see this on Simchas Torah. And the truth is that that's what it used to be. It used to be that people were learned enough to lane their own Aliyahs. And they don't take into it. It's a beautiful thing. But the truth is that a lot of people are not able to do this. And not to embarrass people who don't know, we've made a general rule that we have the person who's the Baal Koreh who's doing this, because it is a significant skill. It takes a lot of work and a lot of preparation, and the people who give the schus to the community are enabling those who do not know how to read it necessarily themselves. Yeah.
So you don't really need a Gabbai Sheni up there as long as you have the.
Yeah, according to Levush you wouldn't. According to the Magen Avraham you would. According to the Magen Avraham it's more of like 2 witnesses. So then in that case those are independent of that. But you're right. But that's why I always try to get it as well, just to see it's more respectful in that respect.
And once you have the second Aliyah coming up, the first guy's up.
Then you're right. Yeah, second Aliyah is always fine because you have he stays for 1 extra Aliyah. So then you're right in that as well.
Question.
Yeah.
On which side the Rishon and Sheni should be on? Which side should they be pulling up from? Or is there a preference?
I don't know. I didn't see any preferences. I do have a book called Sefer Agabai, which I need to review on this, but I don't remember. I don't remember offhand. Why is the Torah broken up in the way that it is? Meaning to say why do we lay in the parashas as we have them? There's no indication in the actual text that there's parashas there. The only indication in the text is that we have 5 books, right? Because we have an 8-line break between each of the books, so we know that there's 4 8-line breaks, which makes 5 books. So we know there's 5 books of the Torah. That's all we know. But the actual breakup of the parashiyos, there's no indication to that. So the truth is that actually is more recent. We already know that the Gemara tells us in Megillah B'Ma'arava that in Israel, in the west, from Babylon, Israel's the west, and they'll probably have a Ma'arav on their walls where they davened in Babylon. So in the Ma'arava, in the west, they would do it as a 3-year cycle, the Gemara tells us, which means they divided up the Torah reading into a 3-year, triennial cycle, which if you then take it, let's say 52, well it's not really 52 Shabbos because it's for the Hebrew years a few short, it's around 50. Let's say 50 times 3, so you have 150, divide the Torah into 150 relatively equal portions, and that's what you get as the portion. Literally the parashiyas would be as such. The Gemara does not record a different opinion to this. This is the only one that's actually recorded, is the Israel practice. But already Rashi tells us, already the Rambam tells us that our practice is the annual cycle, not the triennial cycle. When that developed, where that developed is not very clear. We don't know specifically as to who was the one who enacted that, but clearly sometime in the last 1,500 years.
What they read on Simchat Torah is just like whatever they were.
That's a good question. Simchat Torah itself, in general, is more is more recent in terms of the actual celebration of the Siyum HaTorah. But nonetheless, we have our annual cycle, and the annual cycle therefore takes the Torah and divides into 54 sections. Why 54? Because the years are in flux, meaning some years are shorter, some years are longer because of the extra added Adar, right? So the extra flexibility allows us to squash parashas together or to stretch them out, and thereby allowing us to be able to always finish at a certain point. It happens to be that there are, although the annual cycle is not mentioned explicitly in the Gemara, it does seem the Gemara is dealing with the annual cycle because the Gemara does tell us a number of parashiyos that need to be in specific places. So the Gemara, as an example, always describes that the curses should be finished before we'd have Shavuos, as an example, right? So that's when we finish. The Chukosai is always done 1 parasha before, the 1 parasha break, or Bamidbar before Shavuos. We also know that the Eyor end needs to finish the other curses. So Kisavo is usually a week break before Rosh Hashanah, right? So Kisava, and then Nitzavim, and Nitzavim Vayelech, right? Goes before Rosh Hashanah. So we know that that it's set up in a certain way, and everything else sort of goes in cycle. Everybody says, Parashas Mikes is always Chanukah. That's actually not really the point. That's just because if you start the Torah Bereshis, there's no double parashas, right? And so it's just there are that amount of weeks to get to Chanukah. So, but it happens to be that's as it happens to be, as opposed to the specific guidelines the Gemara gave us as to how this should work as well. So of course there are the weeks which are taken out of the cycle. So for instance, a Shabbos Chol HaMoed does not have a parsha. It is only reading about the Yom Tov itself. So that's pulled out of the cycle, and then we also have like Yom Tovs as well, which sort of knock out a week depending on how the constellation of the Yom Tovs fall, which is how the rest of the parashiyos will be stretched or compressed as well. Why is that people say chazak, chazak, it is chazak at the end of the Torah reading, at the end of the reading of the book? Anybody know? Very interesting question. So it's seen actually, going back to the first chapter of Sefer Yehoshua. Yehoshua is told multiple times, chazak ve'ematz, be strong and be strengthened. And I saw that the Avudraham makes the observation that he was likely at that point in time holding the newly finished Sefer Torah, right? Meaning when that speech was happening, because he had just finished writing the Torah. Because the Torah had been the last, whether it was that he put it together, or the last 8 psukim, whatever else it is, but he is now holding the Torah when he is told, Chazak, now the next chapter, Chazak ve'ematz, right? So when we finish a section in Torah, which is clearly delineated in the Torah, Chazak ve'ematz, go to the next stage in strength as well. Why does the Torah not have vowels or cantillation? It would be so much easier for Bar Mitzvah boys and for Baalei Kriya if there was vowels or cantillation. All we have is the letters, right? It's so confusing. It takes so much work to learn. Do you know how much time it takes to prepare a new parsha in the Torah for learning?
What would the correctors do? What would the correctors do?
Exactly. So part of it is to engage the community, right? We need to make sure that old fellow at the back, right? No. So the truth is that it's a very, very interesting observation. The Gemara in the Darim, Daf Lamed Zayin Beis, tells us that there's a number of things which are what's called halacha l'Moshe Mishnah. I actually read it to you. It's just I thought this was really, really fascinating. The Gemara tells us, in the name of Rav Ika bar Avin, in the name of Rav Hananel, in the name of Rav, Vayikru b'Sefer Torah Elokim Meforash Som Seichel Vayovinu b'Mikra, which is a pasuk in Nehemiah describing that public reading of the Torah. And it gives them all these different things. This is the actual way you read it. That refers to the vowels. Meforash ze targum, the Aramaic translation. The way that the psukim are broken up. This is the cantillation. All of these things are considered a halacha l'Moshe Mishnah, which means a tradition which was given with how at Sinai. So it was given as an oral tradition rather than a written tradition. Right? So why is that? Why is that we have this tradition? Also the ksiv kris as well, the variations of how we read it and see it, which are slightly different. There's a variation between the way it's written and the way it's said. So why is that? I think that the most basic idea is that all of these are already interpretive. I really mean to say like this: the moment I add in a nekudat, then I'm already interpreting the Torah. That itself is already one stage away. That remains oral. The Torah is open to so many different levels of meaning that even the cantillation is a interpretation. Let me give you like an example. The Gemara tells us that there's 5 psukim she'en la'hem ha'echreya, which is that there's no way to know which way a particular word is swinging. Is it going backwards or forwards? Right? Where does that word go? Is it reforming is the end of the previous phrase, or is it the beginning of the new phrase? The Gemara says that. You know what's interesting is that if you look at the ta'amim, if you look at the cantillation, the trop does distinguish. The trop does tell you where it goes, right? Because there's particular trops which connect, and there's particular ones which stop. A mafsek, right? So esnachta is a stop, right? Tavir is a connector, right? So if you want to know just the cantillation, what's interesting is the Gemara does not say, well, look at the cantillation to know which way it goes. The reason for that is because already the cantillation is one level of interpretation. Remove the cantillation, and there still is the flexibility of that word going both ways, right? And the same thing with how do you punctuate a word, right? So we have traditions on how to punctuate the word, but the word remains open to be understood differently too. So as an example, like let's say in Parashas Vayetze, as an example. we know that it describes that Rachel comes with the sheep. It uses the word ba'ah, right? And Rashi really points out that the word ba'ah has to be read differently 2 times there. One is ba'ah and one is ba'ah, right? Mina'el and milara, right? They mean different things, right? But that's where the cantillation makes a difference. But when it comes to, I'm trying to think of an example when it comes to the vowels. The vowels can actually make a difference depending on how you actually punctuate that word.
Yeah, right in the same parsha.
What was that?
Yeah, right there. Right
What's the example?
Yeah, Vayashk and Vayishak.
There you go.
Same
Excellent.
spelling.
Thank you.
You don't want to mix up those two.
Exactly. So that's a very good example, right?
It says for Hanaro without the hay.
Yes. So that's a Kriya Ksiv example, and so meaning to say that even we know what tradition tells us what that is, but even tradition itself is already a level of interpretation, right? Take away that example that Dr. Huberfeld was giving was Vayashk. He gives to drink. Vayishak, he kisses. It's in the same area. It's about Rachel, right? It's the same letters. Vav Yud Shin Kuf, as an example. But what is interesting, clearly the Torah is playing off of those two. Clearly the Torah is telling us that there's a lesson to be learned between the way he's treating the sheep and the way he's treating her, right? There's something that over here, a connection which is being formed. But the vowels tell us they're different words. But the words, the letters themselves, hold a lot more, which is beyond the actual interpretation of the vowelage itself. Which is why we read it as such. And therefore, if you think about it, reading the Torah then becomes a beautiful convergence of both written and oral tradition at the same time, because it's being read mikra in a certain way, but there's also the way it's being written, which is what the Gemara describes this as what's called yesh aim lemikra, yesh aim lemasoret. Right, so which is predominant of those two traditions? Is it the way it's said, or as it's written? Right. So this speaks to this particular issue as well. At the end of the Torah, why are there different numbers of people called up? So let's just do a quick recap. So during a weekday of Shabbos Mincha, there are 3 aliyahs. 10 psukim, at least 3 each. At least 3 psukim each aliyah. There's one exception to this. Where's that? Purim. Purim's the only exception because there's 9 psukim. Okay, that's because we read the section at the end of Parshas B'Shalach where it talks about Amalek's attack, and there only are 9 psukim. That's the only time we read 9 psukim. There are all other times has to be at least 10 psukim, three per one at least, per each person at least. Okay, and one of them also has to be 4. Okay, Rosh Chodesh, you're right. There's a breakup of that middle pasuk. The Gemara discusses that to divide it into 4 aliyahs. You have to have that first section needs to have a pasuk which goes backwards and forwards. The first and second aliyah share one pasuk. It's a double pasuk. Most people aren't aware of this, but that happens in Rosh Chodesh. The Gemara Megillah describes this. On a more special day, like a Rosh Chodesh, then you will lane 4 aliyahs. Similarly, another day you lane 4 aliyahs is Chol HaMoed. Good. You will notice that Chanukah has 3. So it's already an indicator that Chanukah is really a chol. Completely a chol day. Happens to be there's certain mitzvahs and halachas of what to do on it, but it's completely a chol day. In terms of its holiness, it is not like a Rosh Chodesh, and is not like a Chol HaMoed, which is why on a day like Chanukah and Chol HaMoed, it gets upped to 4 because of Rosh Chodesh, which is what happened today, right?
Because of Maftir?
What was that?
Isn't that because of Maftir?
No.
It's using the second Torah though for
No, that's the 4th aliyah.
Oh, Chol HaMoed, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Chol HaMoed, exactly.
Right,
Then, when you go up one step, you go one level higher in holiness. The next level is a Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you have 5 aliyahs. Then, when you go up one level higher than that, that's Yom Kippur. You have 6 aliyahs. And when you go to Shabbos, that's where you get the highest, which is 7 aliyahs as well. Why 7 on Shabbos? So, clearly, as the Torah already points out, clearly it's reflecting the week. Right? Meaning, clearly it's reflecting the weekday of the 7 days of creation, which is what Shabbos is testifying to, which is why it's divided up as such. That should be obvious in terms of the constellation of aliyahs. The Torah does also mention for people who didn't have the opportunity of being involved in spiritual pursuits during the week, they're going to hear 7 sets of brachos, right? One for each of the day of the week as well, which happens to be fascinating. One of the biggest differences between the laning on Shabbos and the laning on any other time is can you add aliyahs? Exactly. The Mishnah tells us that Shabbos is the only time you can add an aliyah. You're not allowed to add an aliyah for a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. You can only add an aliyah for a 7. with the exception of sometimes complicated days like yesterday, where you have a 3 Torah day, where you have the 7th Aliyah being Rosh Chodesh, more complicated to add in such circumstances. At the end of the Torah reading, or perhaps at the beginning, depending on how you interpret this, there's a time where the Torah is lifted and displayed to the community. It's a completely unnecessary function, if you think about it, right? Meaning, you could just do, let's say you're part of the team that rolls Torahs in a shul. You don't do a Hagba and a Glila. What do? You just have somebody lift it up, put the belt on, you cover it up, and you put it back in the Aron, right? It's an unnecessary part of the ritual. Why do we do this? The Gemara talks about this particular practice, and there's it's called Hagba, which literally means lifting up, and then there's Glila, which is rolling it, right? And so it reminds me actually just of a joke. There's a fellow who comes to the shul and is asked. The gabbai thinks he looks sufficiently, well layered to be able to do Hagba, and he picks it up and it's a terrible disaster, right? And they have to catch him. Never mind the Torah. And it's terribly embarrassing, and this is his first time, and everybody looks at him that way. So he goes out. He says he's going to make a point of this. So he gets a gym contract, and he goes out, and for months and months and months he's bench pressing and he's lifting and he's strengthening himself up, and he walks back into that same shul that he visited, and he flips off his coat and he walks in, and it comes up to the Torah reading, and the gabbai points to him, and he walks right up there, and he takes it in 17 columns on one foot, spins around 3 times, puts it back down, and he says, "How was that?" The gabbai says, "It was great. Just I got you up for shlishi." So nonetheless, so it is seen as a very big kavod, and to do this. It actually, interesting enough, the Ramban points out that this actually comes from a very fascinating source, and that is if you go to the end of Sefer Devarim, there's a very powerful ritual, a very powerful moment that's described as that when the nation of Israel come into the land of Israel, whether it's the day they come in or a little bit later, they have to go to Har Grizim and Har Eval, which we're going to be visiting in February for those who'd like to come on the trip of Ezra Hashem. So you go to Har Grizim and Har Eval, and they stand between, the nation of Israel stands between the 2 mountains, and it's, by the way, it's got what's called acoustic perfection there, which means you can hear very clearly both directions. And on the blessings are given on Har Grizim, and the curses are given on Har Eval. Those are parities. There was the exact same number of blessings and curses given in each direction. The last of those blessings and curses, the way the Torah frames it is as the curses, but there were blessings too. Baruch asher lo yakim es divrei Torah azos. Cursed be the person who does not hold up this Torah. And obviously the blessing is Baruch asher yakim es divrei Torah azos. The Ramban explains that what that obviously means is that this refers to living Torah, living a life which reflects this, right? Establishing Torah in our lives, right? But he says, but it also refers to the person who lifts up the Torah, because it's important to be able to see the Torah. So therefore, Baruch Asher Yakim Es Divrei Torah refers to a person who makes the Torah available for all to see. Only a few people are getting Aliyah. What about the rest of the people? Everybody should be able to see the Torah. And there's a sense that there's a lot of blessing upon people who view the actual Torah, the Torah script itself, and make it available to people. Interestingly enough, in Masechah Sofrim, it describes that this was done before the Torah was read, this practice, but the Ramot quotes another practice that's done afterwards, which is why you'll see the divergence in Sephardic and Ashkenazic. You'll notice that the Sephardim do their Hagba before they lane, the Ashkenazim do it after they lane. Again, a Hagba isn't necessary, right? You don't need to lift it up to be able to read it or to put it away, right? It is clearly a demonstration of the Torah itself, and that is why it is. Now you'll notice that during the Hagba, some people pull out their pinky, right, and some people don't, right. So where does that come from? It's very hard to trace that minhag of the pinky. It seems that the practice is that it's like pointing, right? Meaning when you say Zois HaTorah, this is the Torah, you want to identify it. But pointing with your finger, as we tell our children, is not very polite, right? So it's seen as a more respectful pointing. That's the way I assume it must be, although you will not see this in most classic sources. You will see other people have a practice that is not that. A lot of people have the practice to bow towards the Torah. Zois HaTorah asher samoshe, and you're supposed to wait, whether you're flipping out your pinky or whether you're bowing, you're supposed to wait until you actually see the text, not the back of the Torah. Which means that in some traditions, a person has a full circle. In most traditions, it's supposed to be to the right, and then 180 degrees to the left, for a real Hagbah. And so when the text comes into your view, that's when you acknowledge and say, Zos HaTorah Hashem Asa Moshe. You will notice that in the Siddur, that it's actually not one pasuk. Did you notice that? Do you ever notice that? It's that when the Torah is raised, it's actually a convergence of two psukim. Zos HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael. That's one pasuk. That pasuk actually comes from Devarim. And then Al Pi Hashem B'Yad Moshe is another pasuk in Bamidbar. Those do not come together as well.
It's not a full pasuk.
It's not a full pasuk either.
I heard they shouldn't really be saying that.
Correct. So interesting now, if I came across the observation, I'm just trying to remember who said it, that in fact this was originally a mistake, because there would be a practice to say the pasuk, the Vilna Gaon said, is Zos HaTorah, and then he says Al Pi Hashem Yachanu Al Pi Hashem Yisol Al Pi Hashem Yad Moshe, and they said the full pasuk, right? But then people contracted that second pasuk incorrectly. But nonetheless, even having that being the case, it's nonetheless, this is a practice which seems almost universal. Which, if that being the case, well, there has to be certain respect given to it, because otherwise it would have been annihilated. Yes.
Shouldn't we do a 360 degrees?
It would make sense. It would make
Because
sense.
That way everyone can see. If you just do 180, people will not see.
It would make sense. I mean, it's talked about, and the general way is to the right, to the left, and I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why they wanted.
Then maybe it's because that bima was at the front.
There you go. Chaya, you're 100%. Yeah, Chaya, it all comes together. It all comes together. Okay, last thing is just one last question then, just for today, is why is there a Haftarah as well? So we know that actually this is the topic of my Bar Mitzvah drasha, as it happens to be. Do you remember? The Haftarah, it seems to be there was a period in time where the Jews were not allowed to read the Torah. It's not clear when that is. There are two identified periods that it could be. One is during the Hasmonean period, when the Greeks were not allowing them to read the Torah. But I think more likely is later on during the Hadrianic persecutions, which is in the following year 135. After the year 135, the Romans were pretty upset with the Jews, because the Jews just didn't know when to back down, right? And there'd been now ultimately 3 rebellions between the year 65 to the year 132, and they were just tired. So they basically razed Jerusalem to the ground. No Jews were allowed to go into it. They renamed the country Palestina, which gave us a lot of problems today for the uneducated masses. And there were many, and besides the fact that they eradicated over 900 villages and killed over 1 million people in the Hadrianic in following the Bar Kokhba rebellion, these people just don't know when to give up, right? And so one of the things they did was they made a number of enactments, and one of them was that you shouldn't read the Torah, right? So in response to that, so imagine that you were not able to read the Torah, and that was the centerpiece of your service. And that's the time that anchors us to your average person who's probably not literate, right? Meaning your average Jew who's coming in, this is when they're hearing the Torah, is when they're learning their Torah experience. So therefore they enacted the Haftarah. The Haftarah was a section of Navi, not Ksuvim. Interesting enough. All the Haftarahs are from Nevi'im and not Ksuvim. And it is a section which relates directly to the theme of the Parsha or the theme of the day. Right? So the theme of the day would be Rosh Chodesh. The Chanukah, the 4 Parshios, Shkalim, Zachor, Para, and Chodesh, it relates to the theme of the day. But you'll notice something interesting, because it reflects the Kriyas Torah, it actually has unique features as well in that respect. And that is that every Haftarah has a minimum of 21 psukim. Why 21 psukim? Because that's your 7 aliyahs with 3 psukim each. So that's why every Haftarah has to have 21 psukim. And you'll notice an interesting thing, this I did not notice before, is that's why there's also 7 brachas as well. Do you notice that? Right? Because to get the Haftarah today, there's the maftir before and after. That's 1. That's 2. There's the bracha before the Haftarah, and then there's 4 brachas afterwards, which lead us to our 7 brachas, which means to say is that silently the Jews just don't know when to back down either, right? Which is that they keep going, and we keep this tradition as well of this of the Haftarah, which in a certain sense is seen as an addition to the Torah from the Navi, augmenting the what was done in the Torah reading itself. So just a few questions which relate to, which I believe are very instrumental in the basic practice that we have on a really regular basis. I'm sure there's more questions, but feel free to, Debarach.
No, I was just going back to how Glila, because you didn't
Yes.
Glila, but isn't there a source like what saying, well, the Glila is more important than Hagbah?
Yes, the Gemara says that the Goylel takes a schar kulam is like a very important thing. It's not clear if that Glila is referring to the Hagbah itself, or the Glila itself.
It could be Hagbah
So,
and Glila together. Like
it could be that it was done together.
Right.
Generally speaking, unfortunately, it's seen as the lowest today. So people are like, yeah, I'm a Rosh Yeshiva. Like, and you're giving me glib. So it used, right? So interestingly enough, that's not in the Sephardic world. That's not the case. But it used to be that apparently, I remember Rav Bleichman, who was one of my teachers, told me that when Rav Hutner was particularly angry with the Talmud, he'd give them Hagbah and he'd do Glila. To show them what he's feeling about them. But it is a beautiful kavod, and the Gemara does give great accolades to it, whether or not people think of themselves as an important thing, because it's not a verbal kavod. Ariel.
Rabbi Spiegel by the Stiebel takes Glila.
There you go. Thank you. So it's a big kavod. Yes.
Why is Glila the one thing that you can give to a non-bar mitzvah?
Oh, good question. I think Hagbah probably the same thing. It's just not a good thing physically. Meaning, like, it needs to be a bar mitzvah to get an aliyah, technically speaking. But Glila is a very easily accessible physical action, right? So I think that's what it is. Technically speaking, there is an aliyah. I mean, it depends how tall the Torah is, right? But some of those tall Torahs have a little bit of a problem. But technically speaking, the maftir could be taken by a katan as well, right? I laid my first aliyah when I was 11, which is a maftir. So like but that's because it seems the additional, literally what the word maftir means. Any other questions? Any thoughts on or landings? Any reflections from my amazing Balei Kriya in the room? Yeah, Ariel.
We were talking before about the vowels, the trub.
Yes.
In the Torah, but we do have smaller letters, bigger letters, longer letters. So there are letters that are meant to send us a message that are written down.
Yes, so you're right. You're 100% right. So those as well. So we have a lot of textual variants in the Torah itself, and those are also seen as you're right. That actually makes its way into the actual written tradition, not the oral tradition as well. So the upside down nuns by the Vayi ben Saran, the large ayin in the word Shema Yisrael. There's a lot of words. The Vav in Gachon. There's a lot of like textual variants which actually makes its way into the Torah. If you look at academics, if you read academic journals, you'll see that some of them when there was a development even in the textual thing itself. That's a complicated, very thin ice. You're walking in that direction. But I would just make the observation that the Gemara already recognizes this. The Gemara says, and this is just a very profound thing to understand, is the Gemara is describing is how accurate is our Torah Shevichsav. The Gemara says, well, maybe the Malay v'chaser, which means a letter which adds, it doesn't add any meaning. So, for instance, if you have a vav in the feminine plural, right? Let's say the word shulchanot, right? If there's a vav between the nun and the taf at the end, it doesn't change the meaning if there is or not. It's just called malay or chaser, right? Is it malay or chaser? So the Gemara says that we are not bekiyim b'malay v'chaser today, so that's not considered a problem. The Gemara does make an observation in Kedushin that the middle of the Torah is the vav of Gachon, which is in Parshas Shmini, right? So from an initial look, you say, oh yeah, that's like towards the middle of Sefer Vayikra, that would add up, right? The problem is I think about 4,000 to 5,000 letters off, right? So that's a significant amount of discrepancy, if that's really what it is, which is a major thing. So all the academics say, like, "Oh, look at this! You see, they lost the tradition a long time ago. Our Torah is clearly quite different to what it was beforehand." I came across I don't have it in front of me because I didn't prepare this, but an Israeli professor who made the observation, which I think is a brilliant observation, is that he's actually referring to what you're referring to. It's referring to all the abnormal letters in the Torah. If you count them all up, right? And there's multiple of them, some smaller, the Aleph Ze'ira of Vayikra. You count all the strange letters up in the Torah. All of those, the middle of all of the strange letters is the Vav Gachon, which is enlarged, right? The middle of all the double, the Darash, which is the middle of the words, is not the middle of the words at all in the Torah. It's the middle of all the double words, right? If you look at the Torah, if you count all the words that are doubled, the word Darash is in the middle of the Torah itself. But so there are certain textual features, but that which made it beyond even the oral tradition as well. Good points. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Chaya.
So, if there was a prohibition at some point of laning,
Yep.
right? Why didn't someone say, okay, we wrote other things down when there was a fear of losing them? Why did we write this down then? Why is it only oral tradition?
Oh, good question. So we're always reticent about writing things down, right? Anytime you write down something, on the one hand, it pegs it, right? And one level of interpretation. On the other hand, it also makes that accessible, right? So, as an example, that's why when it talks about the writing of the Mishnah and the writing of the Gemara, the pasuk that's used is Shem Heferi Torasecha. It was a time to do for God. We annulled your Torah, so that it's seen as an annulling to write things down. It doesn't seem that the cantillation and the vowels was at the greatest risk. What was at greatest risk was to do the oral tradition. They had to therefore take a breath in and do that.
The Masoretic notes, is that related somehow? Like those things at the end of the parsha,
Yeah.
the art scroll?
Yes, so the Masoretic notes are actually not from the Torah itself. They belonged to different families, Masoretic families, whose job it was to count the letters in the Torah. So there was, like, as an example, the Rambam quotes it, but talks about the Ben Asher family as an example. And he said that their job was to count all the letters in the Torah, count all the repetitions, and they created codes on the side. These were Masoretic notes on the sides of the Chumash and the manuscripts that would allow them to keep track, so that when the Torahs were written, the Torahs were perfect, right? So if you look, as an example, if you go online and you look at the Ben Sasson Codex, or you look at the Leningrad manuscript, or the Aleppo Codex. These are the earliest manuscripts that we have, going back 1,000 years. They're not Torahs, they're manuscripts of the Torahs, right? You'll see down the side of the columns all this coding, right? And those coding was written by the Masoretic families in order, when they wrote the Torahs, they used that as the key to it as well. If you go to the old Mikros Gedolos, right? The green Mikros Gedolos. Do you remember these, the thin Mikros Gedolos? Do you know what I'm talking about? They have in them what's called Mesorah Gedola and Mesorah Katana. Most of the Mikros Gedolos do not have them today. Mesorah Gedola is a law in enlarged. It's not. It actually just tells you this word appears 4 times in this context in all of Torah. This word appears only once in this way, right? And it describes all these things. The Mesorah Katana is the shortened version of this. Note, by the way, that which pirush on the Torah is a pirush on the Mesorah. We all know it, doesn't realize that he's doing a pirush on it, is the Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim is a pirush on the Mesorah itself. So whenever the Torah says this word appears 4 times only, the Baal HaTurim is going to tell you why it only appears those 4 times, or what the gematria is of those. That's where he's coming from. He's starting with that. But that was added later on in the last 2,000 years. Oh, we have it in the sun? There you go. There you go. So the older Mikros Gedolos do have it. There you go. Excellent. So yeah, the bottom, this is the Mesorah Katana. There you go. So you'll have a Mesorah, and it'll tell you all these things. If you read the Mesorah and then you read the Baal HaTurim, you'll understand what the Baal HaTurim is saying. Okay? Go. What was that?
There's an amazing one for me kids.
Yeah.
The one where they give you the Masoretic notes.
Yes.
The number of words in the parsha, which happens to be 2025, and it's a reminiscence to Hanukkah because 8 times 250. Nair is 250 in Gematria, 8 times 250, and then 25 is the Kafeh.
Amazing. Amazing. And it's this year as well as it happens to be. And it happens to be, we'll close it. Today is
Today's
the 7th day of Hanukkah, which is 77 years and 7 months and 7 days from the founding of the State of Israel, as happens to be today. Yeah.
It's also 2025 is also to tell you, because there was a machlokes whether Potiphera was 1 word or 2 words.
Ah, very interesting. There you go. Kala Omer as well. Okay. One interesting. 2 words. He has an interesting one. So Eliezer, do you know why it is that Nebuchadnezzar has a different name in different books of Tanakh? Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadrezzar? The reason is because his Babylonian name is Nabukaduri Utsur. And it's just different ways of formulating the same name.
Somebody had a lot of free time on their hands.
Exactly.
No,